A German general stands in a makeshift operating theatre, his hands poised above an unconscious Soviet prisoner. The man's infected leg requires amputation. 3 months earlier, Schultz would have turned away without hesitation. Today, his scalpel moves with the same precision he once reserved exclusively for Wehrmacht soldiers. May 1945, southern Germany, a prisoner of war camp where enemies become patients. This is the story of how one military doctor discovered that the Hippocratic Oath recognizes no borders, no flags, no enemies, only suffering that demands to be healed. Before we go on, if you enjoy these untold stories from history, do consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. The 8th of May 1945, Major General Ernst Schultz removed his medical corps insignia and placed it carefully upon the desk of his field hospital office. Through the canvas walls, he could hear American voices, crisp, efficient, speaking a language he barely understood. The Reich he had served for 6 years was collapsing around him. His hands, which had sutured thousands of German soldiers, trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the sudden absence of purpose. Schultz was 52 years old. He had joined the Wehrmacht medical service in 1939, believing that medicine and military duty were inseparable. His father had been an army surgeon in the Great War. His grandfather had treated wounded soldiers after Sedan in 1870. Service to the fatherland ran through 3 generations like a steady pulse. Throughout the war, Schultz had followed his units from Poland to France, from the frozen steppes of Russia to the mountains of Italy. Wherever German soldiers fell, he was there, extracting shrapnel, stopping hemorrhages, saving lives when he could, easing deaths when he could not. He never questioned whom he treated. His duty was clear. German soldiers, his compatriots, men who spoke his language, sang his songs, fought his country's battles. The concept of treating enemy wounded seemed abstract, even dangerous. Resources were limited. Morphine, sulfur drugs, blood plasma. These belonged to his own men. To divert them elsewhere felt like betrayal. American military police escorted him to the prisoner compound 3 days later. The camp sprawled across a former Wehrmacht training ground. Rows of tents surrounded by barbed wire, watchtowers at each corner. Schultz walked past clusters of German prisoners, many still wearing their uniforms. Some saluted. He did not return the gesture. That world had ended. The American medical officer who met him was Captain James Morrison, a surgeon from Chicago. Morrison spoke adequate German, his accent flat and nasal. "General Schultz, you'll oversee the medical barracks. We have 1,200 prisoners here. Germans mostly, some Austrians." Morrison paused, watching Schultz's face carefully. "And some liberated concentration camp survivors. Russians, Poles. You'll treat them all." Schultz's jaw tightened. "I am a prisoner myself, Captain. I will follow orders, but I should tell you, I am a military surgeon. I treated soldiers." Morrison's expression remained neutral. "Here, you're a doctor. That's all that matters." The 15th of May. Schultz entered the medical barracks for his first shift. The building had been a Wehrmacht supply depot, long, drafty, with concrete floors and insufficient heating. American medics had converted it into a 50-bed infirmary. Schultz expected to see German prisoners, perhaps some with untreated wounds from the final battles. Instead, he stopped 3 steps inside the entrance. His breath caught. 27 patients filled the beds, 17 were German, 10 were not. The non-Germans occupied the beds nearest the entrance. Skeletal figures with hollow eyes, their bodies bearing marks Schultz had never seen in his field hospitals. Numbers tattooed on forearms, scars from systematic beatings. A young Pole missing 3 fingers on his left hand, the stumps infected and weeping pus. An American medic named Corporal Henderson approached. "Doctor, we need you to examine the new admissions. 3 came in overnight with pneumonia. 2 need surgical consultation for old fractures that healed incorrectly." "Which patients?" Schultz asked quietly. Henderson checked his clipboard. "Beds 7, 12 and 14 for pneumonia. Beds 3 and 19 for orthopedic review." He glanced up. "So is there a problem?" Schultz realized he had been staring at bed 3, a Russian perhaps 30 years old, his right femur grotesquely angled from a fracture that had healed without setting. The man watched Schultz with eyes that held neither hope nor fear, only exhaustion. "No problem," Schultz said. He moved to bed 7. The patient was German, a corporal from a panzer division, lungs congested from untreated pneumonia. Schultz examined him with practiced efficiency, ordering sulfur drugs and steam inhalations. Then bed 12, another German, then bed 14, a Pole. Schultz's hands hesitated over the stethoscope. The patient's breathing was labored, his fever spiking to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Critical condition, Schultz had seen this progression before. Pneumonia advancing towards septic shock. Without immediate antibiotic treatment, the man would die within 48 hours. "Corporal Henderson," Schultz called. "This patient needs penicillin immediately." Henderson returned with the medication. Schultz administered the injection himself, his hands moving automatically through the familiar procedure. Only afterwards, washing up at the basin, did he feel the weight of what he had done. He had given life-saving medicine to a non-German, not out of humanitarian principle, not out of newfound enlightenment, simply because the medical assessment demanded it. That night in his barracks, Schultz lay awake. The Russian with the malformed leg haunted him. In 6 years of war, Schultz had seen countless injuries, but he had never been required to repair them in enemy soldiers. The thought disturbed him, not because it was morally wrong, but because it felt foreign, like being asked to speak a language he had never learnt. The 22nd of May. Captain Morrison invited Schultz to observe an American surgical team. The operation involved a German prisoner with a ruptured appendix. A straightforward procedure, but one that revealed an entirely different medical philosophy. Morrison worked alongside 2 other surgeons, 3 nurses and an anesthesiologist. Their coordination was seamless. But what struck Schultz was the atmosphere. In Wehrmacht field hospitals, surgeons operated in tense silence, conserving words for essential communications. Here the Americans talked. They discussed technique. They questioned each other's decisions. When the younger surgeon suggested an alternative approach to closing the peritoneum, Morrison listened, considered, and adjusted his method. "We call it collaborative medicine, Sossas," Morrison explained, afterwards as they scrubbed out. "No surgeon has all the answers. The patient benefits when we pool our knowledge." Schultz nodded slowly. "In our system, the senior surgeon's judgment is final. And if he's wrong?" The question hung in the air. Schultz had no answer. Morrison pulled out a document, a worn pamphlet with English and German text, the Geneva Convention. "Have you read it?" "I am familiar with it." "Then you know Article 3, Section 2. Members of the armed forces and other persons shall be treated humanely, without adverse distinction founded on race, nationality, or political opinion." Morrison's eyes were steady. "That includes medical treatment, General. A doctor doesn't choose patients by their flag." Schultz felt something shift inside him, not agreement, but the first crack in certainty. "Captain, with respect, you have abundant resources. Penicillin, plasma, surgical supplies. We operated on trains in bombed buildings with morphine running out. When you must choose who receives treatment, how do you not prioritize your own?" Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Then I'll show you something tomorrow. If you're finding this fascinating, do hit subscribe. It helps us uncover more stories like this." The 23rd of May. Morrison brought Schultz to a tent at the far end of the compound. Inside were file boxes, dozens of them, filled with photographs, documents, testimony transcripts. Evidence collected from liberated concentration camps. "Buchenwald," Morrison said, laying out photographs. "Dachau, Bergen-Belsen." His voice remained clinical, but his hands shook slightly as he arranged the images. "These are what happens when medicine serves ideology instead of humanity." Schultz looked, forced himself to look. Photographs of medical experiments, documents signed by German doctors, physicians like himself who had taken the same oath, records of surgical procedures performed without anesthesia, children used as test subjects. Systematic starvation disguised as research. His stomach dropped. These doctors believed they were serving their nation, Morrison said quietly. They convinced themselves that some lives mattered more than others, that medical resources should be allocated according to political value. He met Schultz's eyes. Where does that logic end, General? Schultz's voice cracked when he finally spoke. I did not. I treated soldiers, wounded men. I know. I've read your record. You ran field hospitals, not camps. You saved lives. Morrison gathered the photographs. But you need to understand why we insist that you treat everyone here equally. Because the moment a doctor starts deciding which lives deserve saving based on nationality or race or politics, that's when medicine dies. Schultz left the tent and walked to the perimeter fence. He stood there for 2 hours, watching the sunset. Later he would remember this as the moment his old certainty dissolved. Not dramatically, but quietly, like ice melting in slow spring warmth. The 2nd of June. 3 new patients arrived at the medical barracks. 2 were German prisoners transferred from another camp. The 3rd was a Soviet soldier, one of the Red Army men liberated from a prisoner column during the final Allied advance. The Soviet soldier had a penetrating abdominal wound, sustained 3 weeks earlier, never properly treated. Infection had spread through his peritoneal cavity. His fever raged at 105 degrees. His pulse was thready. Without immediate surgery, he would die before morning. Schultz examined him with the detachment he had learnt in 6 years of triage. The wound was survivable if treated now. He called for Captain Morrison. I need to operate tonight. Morrison raised an eyebrow. You're asking permission? I am informing you of my medical judgment. Schultz paused. He is critically ill. The surgery is high risk, but he has a chance. Then operate, doctor. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Schultz worked with an American surgical team, navigating adhesions, draining abscesses, repairing damage to the small intestine. His hands moved with the precision of decades. He did not think about the patient's nationality. He thought about anatomy, about sepsis, about the delicate balance between aggressive intervention and causing further trauma. At 2 in the morning, he sutured the final layer. The patient's vital signs had stabilized. Infection was controlled. Barring complications, he would survive. Schultz pulled off his surgical gloves and sat heavily on a stool. Exhaustion washed over him. Not physical, but something deeper. He had just spent 4 hours saving a Soviet soldier's life. A man whose army had killed thousands of Germans. A man who, 3 months ago, Schultz would have considered an enemy beyond redemption. And yet, standing over that operating table, Schultz had felt something he had not experienced since 1939. The pure, uncomplicated purpose of medicine. No politics, no flags, just a surgeon and a dying patient and the technical challenge of preserving life. Corporal Henderson brought him coffee. Hell of a surgery, Doc. Schultz sipped the bitter liquid. Yes, he said, quietly. Hell of a surgery. June through August, 1945. The medical barracks became Schultz's university. American doctors shared their journals, their techniques, their debates about medical ethics. Schultz read articles from the New England Journal of Medicine, the Journal of the American Medical Association, publications that had been forbidden in Germany. He discovered a world of medical thought that existed beyond national boundaries. Captain Morrison loaned him a book, The Doctor's Dilemma, by George Bernard Shaw. Schultz read it slowly, his English improving week by week. The play explored questions he had never confronted. When resources are limited, how does a doctor choose? What obligations does medicine owe to society versus to individual patients? But the real education came from the barracks themselves. Schultz treated German prisoners who told him about conditions in camps for Soviet POWs, starvation, exposure, systematic neglect. He treated liberated concentration camp survivors who described the S doctors, the selections, the experiments. He treated a Polish resistance fighter whose hands had been systematically broken by Gestapo interrogators. and who nonetheless shook Schultz's hand in gratitude after treatment. One evening, a young German corporal, a patient recovering from surgery, asked Schultz a question. Herr General, why do the Americans treat us so well? We killed their soldiers. We fought them for years. Why do they feed us, give us medicine, treat us like human beings? Schultz finished quietly. Yes. Schultz thought carefully before answering. Because they believe certain principles transcend war. That even enemies have rights. That medicine serves humanity, not nations. He paused. I am learning that they may be correct. The corporal considered this. Do you think Germany will ever believe that? I hope so, Schultz said. God willing, yes. September 1945. Schultz was called to Morrison's office. The American captain looked tired, the exhaustion of 4 years of war settling into his features. General Schultz, you're being processed for repatriation. You'll be released next month. Schultz felt something unexpected, reluctance. I see. I've written a report on your work here. You saved 37 lives in 4 months, German, Russian, Polish. You treated them all with equal skill. Morrison handed him a folder. These are letters from patients, testimonials. If you face any difficulties during repatriation, these might help. Schultz opened the folder. Letters in German, Russian, Polish, even English. A Soviet soldier thanking him for the abdominal surgery. A Polish survivor praising his treatment of infected injuries. A German corporal expressing gratitude for saving his leg from amputation. Captain Morrison, Schultz said slowly, I entered this camp believing I knew what medicine was. I was wrong. You weren't wrong. You were incomplete. I treated only Germans for 6 years. I believed that was my duty. It was your duty to your army in wartime. But that wasn't medicine. That was military surgery. Morrison leaned back. Medicine is larger than armies, General. Always has been. Schultz closed the folder carefully. I would like to continue this work in Germany, for everyone who needs it. Morrison smiled, the first genuine smile Schultz had seen from him. Then do it. God knows your country will need doctors who understand that healing doesn't stop at borders. A quick note. If you're enjoying this, subscribing really does make a difference. Now back to the story. October 1947, Ernst Schultz stood in the ruins of Frankfurt, surveying what remained of Germany. 2 years had passed since his repatriation. 2 years spent rebuilding not just his career, but his understanding of what it meant to be a physician. The country was devastated. Cities lay in rubble. Millions were displaced. Refugees, former prisoners, bombed out civilians. The medical infrastructure had collapsed. Hospitals were destroyed. Medicine was scarce. Doctors were scarce. And the need was bottomless. Schultz had spent 1946 working in a temporary clinic, treating whoever came through the door. Germans, certainly. But also Polish displaced persons, Russian former prisoners who had nowhere to go, Jewish survivors struggling with trauma and malnutrition. He treated them all. By 1947, he had formulated a plan. He would establish a medical organization dedicated to a single principle, medicine without borders. An organization that would provide care to all war victims, regardless of nationality, religion, or political affiliation. An organization built on the lessons he had learnt behind barbed wire in that American POW camp. He gathered 17 other doctors, Wehrmacht veterans like himself, men and women who had seen the war's devastation and wanted to build something better. They met in a half-ruined church in Frankfurt, sitting on salvaged chairs, planning an impossible dream. We will call ourselves the Medical Service for Humanity, Schultz announced. Our mission to provide medical care to anyone who needs it, German or foreign, former prisoner or former guard. We will not ask about the war. We will ask only about suffering. A surgeon named Hoffman raised a hand. Ernst, who will fund this? Who will supply us? I have contacted the International Red Cross. They have expressed interest. I have also reached out to American and British medical organizations. Schultz pulled out letters, tentative expressions of support. promises to consider assistance. We will start small. 1 clinic, then 2, then 10. He paused. And if no one supports us, then we work anyway with what we have, because this is not optional. This is what medicine requires. 1948 through 1952. The medical service for humanity grew slowly, painfully. Schultz and his colleagues operated from donated spaces, abandoned buildings, church basements, former military facilities. They treated thousands. Schultz spent his days in clinics and his evenings writing articles for medical journals, letters to international organizations, proposals for cooperation between German and Allied medical services. He became an advocate, a voice calling for a new understanding of medical ethics in post-war Europe. In 1949, he attended a medical conference in Geneva. There he met doctors from 27 nations. He spoke about his experience in the POW camp, about the transformation from military surgeon to humanitarian physician. His words were translated into 6 languages. A British doctor approached him afterwards. "General Schultz, your story is remarkable. But I must ask, do you really believe national medical systems can cooperate?" The war created enormous bitterness. "I do believe it," Schultz replied, "because I have seen what happens when medicine becomes nationalist. I have seen the photographs from the camps. I have read the documents. I know where that path leads." He paused. "The alternative is not idealism, doctor. It is necessity. Europe is full of suffering. We cannot heal it alone. We must cooperate or fail." The British doctor extended his hand. "Then count Britain's support." By 1951, the Medical Service for Humanity operated 47 clinics across Germany. They treated 60,000 patients annually. They provided care to refugees, displaced persons, former prisoners, and impoverished Germans without distinction. Schultz's organization became a model for post-war humanitarian medicine. But the work was more than clinical. Schultz understood that medicine needed a new ethical foundation. He worked with the World Medical Association, participating in drafting ethical guidelines for physicians. He contributed to the Declaration of Geneva, an updated Hippocratic Oath for the modern era, explicitly rejecting discrimination in medical care. "I will not permit considerations of age, disease or disability, creed, ethnic origin, gender, nationality, political affiliation, race, sexual orientation, social standing, or any other factor to intervene between my duty and my patient." Schultz read these words at the 1948 Medical Assembly in Geneva. They represented everything he had learnt, everything he had become. 1953 through 1958. Ernst Schultz became one of the principal architects of European medical cooperation in the post-war era. He organized conferences, facilitated knowledge exchange, and advocated tirelessly for international humanitarian law. He worked with the International Committee of the Red Cross to improve protections for medical personnel in conflict zones. He consulted with the nascent World Health Organization on standards for refugee medical care. He trained young doctors, emphasizing that medical duty transcended nationality. But his most important work was personal. Every day, Schultz saw patients. He never stopped being a physician. In his clinic in Frankfurt, he treated a continuous stream of suffering humanity, people whose lives had been shattered by war and who needed healing. One afternoon in 1956, an elderly Russian man entered the clinic. His German was halting, his clothes shabby. He needed treatment for a chronic leg infection, the aftermath of an old injury that had never healed properly. Schultz examined the leg. The scar tissue was extensive, the infection deep. "This will require surgical debridement." "When did you sustain this injury?" 1945, doctor, I was prisoner." Something in the man's voice made Schultz look up. "Prisoner? Where?" "German camp. Wehrmacht. I was Soviet soldier, captured in 1943. The man hesitated. "I nearly died. Infection in abdomen." "But there was German doctor, prisoner doctor, who operated. He saved me." Schultz's hand stopped moving. His breath caught. What was the doctor's name?" "I do not remember. I was very sick, but I remember the surgery. June 1945. American camp in southern Germany. They stared at each other. 11 years collapsed into silence. It was me, Schultz said quietly. I performed that surgery. The Russian man's eyes widened. You? You are the doctor? Yes. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the Russian man grasped Schultz's hand with both of his own. His grip was strong despite his age. You gave me life, doctor. I have children now. Grandchildren. Because of you. Schultz felt tears on his face. The first tears he had shed since the war. I did what any doctor should do. No, you did what few could do. Enemy to enemy, you showed mercy. Not mercy, Schultz said, just medicine. 1959 through 1963. Schultz reduced his clinical work and focused on teaching. At the University of Frankfurt, he established a program in humanitarian medicine and medical ethics. His students came from across Europe, Germany, France, Poland, Russia, Britain. Former enemies studying together, learning that medicine united what war had divided. His lectures were famous. He would begin by describing his 6 years as a Wehrmacht surgeon, the battles, the field hospitals, the certainty that his duty was only to German soldiers. Then he would describe May 1945, the American POW camp, the Russian patient with the abdominal wound. That moment, he would tell his students, changed everything, not because I suddenly became enlightened, not because I had a moral revelation, but because I was forced to confront a simple truth. Suffering does not have nationality. A perforated intestine kills a Russian exactly as it kills a German. Sepsis spreads the same way in every body. Medicine deals with human biology, which recognizes no borders. He would pause, letting the words settle. And if medicine recognizes no borders, then neither can physicians. Our oath is to humanity, not two nations. The moment we forget that, we cease to be doctors. We become technicians serving political masters. His students absorbed these lessons. Many went on to work with international medical organizations. The Red Cross, WHO, Médecins Sans Frontières, when it was founded in 1971. They carried Schultz's philosophy across the world. 1964. Schultz was invited to testify before a tribunal investigating medical crimes committed during the Nazi era. He was not accused. His record was clear. But the court wanted his perspective on how German military medicine had functioned, how doctors had rationalized serving a regime that committed atrocities. Schultz sat in the witness box, 69 years old, his hair white, his hands steady. The prosecutor asked him direct questions. Dr. Schultz, you served in the Wehrmacht Medical Corps for 6 years. Did you ever question the ethical implications of providing medical care exclusively to German soldiers whilst enemy prisoners died from lack of treatment? No, Schultz said. I did not question it. I believe my duty was to my compatriots, that enemy prisoners were the responsibility of their own medical services. When did this belief change? May 1945, when I became a prisoner myself and was ordered to treat all patients equally. He paused. I resisted at first, not openly but internally. I believed the Americans were asking something unreasonable. What changed your mind? Schultz was quiet for a moment. Evidence, Captain James Morrison showed me photographs from the concentration camps, documents signed by German doctors. I realized that the logic I had followed, that medicine should serve national interests, led inevitably to those camps, to experiments on prisoners, to systematic murder disguised as medical research. His voice remained steady. I understood that doctors must maintain an absolute ethical line. We treat the sick, all of them were, without distinction, because the moment we compromise that principle, medicine becomes a tool of ideology. And ideological medicine is not medicine at all. The courtroom was silent. The prosecutor nodded slowly. Thank you, Doctor. If you've stayed with us this far, you're exactly the kind of viewer we make these for. Please do subscribe. September 1967. Ernst Schultz retired from active teaching at age 72. The University of Frankfurt honored him with a ceremony. Colleagues spoke, students presented testimonials. Representatives from the Red Cross and WHO attended. But the moment Schultz remembered came afterwards at the reception. An elderly woman approached him, more grey-haired, her accent Polish. "Dr. Schultz, I was patient in your clinic in Frankfurt, 1948. I was displaced person, no money, very sick. You treated me free." Schultz smiled. "Many people came to that clinic. I'm glad we could help." "You did more than help. You gave me hope. Because you were a German doctor and I was Polish and the war had just ended and you treated me like a human being." She touched his hand. "You showed me that not all Germans were monsters, that some could change." These were the moments that mattered. Not the awards or the testimonies or the international recognition, but the individual patients whose lives he had touched, the suffering he had eased, the hope he had restored. That evening, Schultz sat in his study, reviewing notes for a book he was writing on medical ethics. Through the window, Frankfurt's lights glowed against the darkness. The city had been rebuilt. Germany had been rebuilt. And he had played a small part in ensuring that the new Germany understood medicine as service to humanity, not to ideology. He thought about that May evening in 1945, when he first entered the medical barracks and saw non-German patients in the beds. The confusion he had felt, the resistance, and then slowly the transformation. Medicine, he had learnt, was universal. The Hippocratic Oath truly meant all people, not just citizens, not just allies, but all human beings. The oath recognized no nationalism, no ideology, no political boundaries, only suffering that demanded healing. It had taken a war, defeat, captivity, and the patience of American doctors to teach him this. But he had learnt. And he had spent 22 years ensuring that future generations would not need to learn the same lessons so painfully. March 1972, Ernst Schultz died of heart failure at age 77. His funeral drew hundreds. Former patients, students, colleagues from across Europe. The eulogy was delivered by a Russian doctor who had trained under him in the early 1960s. Professor Schultz taught us that medicine is the practice of universal human dignity. He showed us that doctors are not servants of nations, but guardians of humanity. He proved that even those who once served terrible causes can transform themselves through dedication to healing. The speaker paused. But perhaps his most lasting legacy was not in grand principles, but in small actions repeated daily. Thousands of patients treated without discrimination. Hundreds of doctors trained to see patients as human beings first, nationalities second. Dozens of clinics built on the principle that suffering transcends politics. In his papers donated to the University of Frankfurt Medical Library, there was a letter he had written but never sent, dated June 1945, addressed to his father's memory. "Father, you taught me that a German doctor serves Germany. I believed this for 52 years. I was wrong. A doctor serves humanity. Germany is part of that humanity, yes, but only a part. I spent 6 years treating German soldiers and believing this was the fullness of medicine. I was performing excellent surgery within a catastrophically narrow vision. The Americans forced me to expand that vision, not through speeches or ideology, but by putting suffering patients before me and saying, treat them, all of them. And I discovered that my medical knowledge worked on Russian bodies, Polish bodies, Jewish bodies, exactly as it worked on German bodies. Because bodies do not have nationalities, only people do. And medicine treats bodies, not political identities. I wish you could have learnt this lesson. I wish German medicine had learnt it before the war. How many lives would have been saved? How much suffering prevented? But we did not learn. And so millions died, not just from bullets and bombs, but from medical systems that decided some lives mattered more than others. I cannot change the past, but I can shape the future. I will spend my remaining years ensuring that German doctors understand. The Hippocratic Oath recognizes no borders. Medicine serves all humanity, or it serves no one. The letter was found amongst his papers, preserved as a testament to transformation. From military surgeon to humanitarian physician. From nationalist to universalist. From certainty to wisdom. Ernst Schultz began the war believing medicine served nations. He ended his life proving that medicine serves only humanity, and that this service, pursued with integrity and courage, can heal not just bodies, but the moral wounds of entire societies.